The parking lot was almost empty, the desert night cool against my skin as I hurried toward my old sedan. The single street lamp overhead flickered, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. I had stayed far too late at the office, sifting through invoices until the numbers blurred. All I wanted now was the short drive home and the comfort of silence. When I opened the car door, I didn't notice at first that someone was already inside. The instant I slid behind the wheel, a small hand pressed hard against my mouth. My heart lurched into my throat. I was about to cry out when I saw who it was. My niece, Leora. Her eyes were wide, her little chest rising and falling as though she had run for miles. "Don't say anything, they're listening to us," she whispered. The words barely a breath against my ear. I froze. Confusion swirled with fear. Leora was only 10, usually bright and playful, but now her face carried a shadow I had never seen before. She pulled her hand back slowly, though her fingers still trembled. "Leora," I managed, my voice unsteady. "What are you doing here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed toward the tall office building we had just left. The upper windows glowed faintly, squares of yellow against the dark. Behind the glass, two figures lingered: Cassia Voss, my sister-in-law, and Drummond Hale, the family lawyer. Their heads were bent close together, movements sharp, deliberate. "They've been talking about you," Leora said, her whisper breaking. I heard them before they saw me. My pulse pounded in my ears. Cassia's charm had always hidden a sharpness I tried to ignore, but to hear suspicion from the mouth of a child made it real. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, though I didn't start the engine. The silence around us pressed in heavy, and suddenly, the parking lot didn't feel like a safe place at all. I followed Leora's gaze to those glowing windows, dread sliding into my stomach as the night grew colder. I slid lower in the seat, pulling Leora gently down with me. The glow from the office windows spilled into the parking lot like unblinking eyes. From this angle, I could still see Cassia's silhouette, her hands moving as if she were slicing the air itself. Beside her, Drummond leaned close, his posture stiff and guarded. "Tell me exactly what you heard," I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. Leora pressed her knees to her chest. They were in the hallway. "I was hiding behind the supply cart. Cassia said you'd sign the papers any day now. And then Drummond said, once she signs, she sleeps. Her voice cracked on the last word, as though repeating it carried its own weight. The phrase landed in me like a blow. I stared at her, willing myself to believe she'd misheard, that her imagination had spun fear into words. But there was nothing fanciful in her face. Her eyes were clear, dark pools holding too much knowledge for a child. I swallowed hard. "Did they see you?" She shook her head quickly. "No. I ran out before they came back. But Aunt Cassia kept saying it had to happen soon." I felt the tremor start in my hands, spreading up through my arms. Cassia had always smiled too sweetly, always called me dear Isolde with just a hint of condescension. But I had never imagined something so deliberate, so cruel. The office windows glowed brighter, as if mocking me. Each shadowed movement behind the glass felt like proof that something had shifted, that my place in this family was being rewritten without my consent. Leora's small fingers slipped into mine, and I realized she was the one steadying me now. She didn't look like a child spinning stories. She looked like someone carrying a truth too heavy to hold alone. I gripped her hand tighter, my thoughts already racing toward what we should do next. I turned the key, the engine humming low, and steered us out of the lot without headlights until we reached the main road. My hands gripped the wheel too tightly, the skin around my knuckles stretched pale. Leora stayed silent beside me, small shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the passing streetlights. Neither of us looked back at the building. instead of heading home. I kept driving until the glow of a roadside diner came into view, its neon sign buzzing against the dark. I pulled in, parked under a flickering light, and guided Leora inside. The place smelled of strong coffee and bacon grease, nearly empty except for a trucker at the far counter. We slid into a booth, and I ordered coffee for myself and warm milk for her. When the waitress left, Leora leaned forward. They said it was about papers. Something called a transfer. Cassia told Drummond you'd trust her enough to sign without asking questions. Her words clawed at my memory. Just last week, Cassia had leaned across my kitchen table with that honeyed smile, insisting a power of attorney would help the business run smoothly while my son traveled. She called it harmless, routine. I had felt uneasy then, but I let her charm cover my doubt. Now the pieces sharpened like glass. Leora hesitated before adding, I also saw an envelope on the catering table. It was marked supplements. Cassia picked it up when she thought no one was watching. My stomach tightened. Supplements. The phrase from earlier once she signs. She sleeps suddenly felt literal. I stared down at the steaming coffee in front of me, the bitter smell turning my mouth dry. The waitress set down the milk, and Leora cupped it with both hands, her eyes never leaving mine. Aunt Isolde. They're planning something, aren't they? I reached across the table, covering her trembling fingers with my own. Anxiety pressed in from all sides, rising into dread I could no longer ignore. I knew then that going home was not an option, and the silence between us carried the weight of what we both feared might come next. By the time we left the diner, the horizon was only beginning to lighten, a faint ribbon of gray above the desert. I drove Leora to her mother's house and watched her slip inside quietly, not wanting her drawn any deeper into what I was beginning to unravel. My own home felt colder than usual when I stepped inside, though the air was still warm from the night. I did not sleep. Instead, I pulled the lockbox from the hall closet and laid its contents across the kitchen table. Share certificates, original contracts, and deeds, all the paper bones of a lifetime's work. With careful hands, I slid them into a fireproof bag, tucked it behind a stack of linens in my bedroom closet, and placed a small digital recorder in the drawer of the desk where Cassia often liked to sit. Next came the computer. I scanned and attached files to a secure email addressed to an independent CPA in Albuquerque, a woman I had worked with years ago, someone outside the family's reach. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard before pressing send, but once I did, a calm settled over me. The first stone had shifted. The silence of the house was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator as I opened the accounting software. Line after line of expenses filled the screen. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but patterns began to emerge. A series of consulting invoices, each to a name I barely recognized. Mara Quint appeared at regular intervals. The sums were inflated, far higher than what any consultant should draw, and yet the descriptions were vague. Wellness advisory or strategic support. I leaned back, pressing my fingertips to my temple. Mara Quint. I had never hired her. I doubted she had ever stepped into the office. The realization left a bitter taste in my mouth. The clock on the wall clicked past 4 in the morning. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Bram Ellison, the former operations director who had left abruptly after one of many clashes with Cassia. Bram, I need to see you. Something isn't right. Please call me when you can. I set the phone down, the weight of exhaustion pressing at the edges of my mind. But I kept staring at the screen until the message showed delivered, knowing that the cracks were no longer hairline, they were spreading. By the time I reached the office, the desert sun had barely risen, its light slanting through the wide glass windows of the conference room. Cassia was already there, arranging a display of pastries on the polished table as though this were a celebration rather than a meeting. A ceramic teapot steamed gently at her side, the air filled with the scent of chamomile and something sharper beneath it. "Isolde, dear," she said warmly, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness. "I thought we could have a family breakfast together before the day gets away from us." On the table lay a leather folder, neatly tabbed, its spine aligned precisely with the edge of her plate. I didn't have to open it to know what it contained. Drummond Hale sat across from her, flipping through papers without ever raising his eyes. His silence was more telling than words. I forced a smile and took a seat. "This looks elaborate for a simple breakfast." Cassia slid a plate toward me, her bracelets chiming softly. "You've been working too hard. Just some tea, some pastries, and a few signatures to make life easier for you. Nothing more." Her hands moved with deliberate ease, pouring the amber liquid into my cup. A faint aroma rose, floral, with an undercurrent that made my throat tighten. I set the cup down untouched, folding my hands in my lap. "Routine documents," she continued, pushing the folder closer. "Power of attorney, a minor transfer clause. Drummond can confirm everything is in order." Drummond cleared his throat, but kept his eyes on the paper in front of him. "Yes. Standard procedure." His voice carried no conviction. A soft rustle behind me drew my attention. Leora had slipped into the room quietly, her eyes darting toward the tall windows. She tugged at my sleeve and whispered so low I barely heard her. "There's a black SUV outside. They've been sitting there since you came in. They're watching us." My chest tightened, the air in the room suddenly heavier, as though the glass walls had closed in. Cassia's smile remained fixed, but her gaze sharpened, catching the flicker of hesitation in my expression. I rested my hand gently over Leora's, steadying her, and with the other, I slid the untouched cup of tea a few inches away, knowing I would need every ounce of clarity for what was coming next. Bram met me at the side entrance of St. Francis Medical Center, his expression grim but steady. He carried a slim folder under his arm, the kind of folder that could change the shape of a life. "I pulled the invoices you flagged," he said as we stepped into the records wing, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "They're all tied to someone named Mara Quint." He opened the folder, showing line after line of inflated charges labeled consulting services. Except Mara isn't a consultant. She's Cassia's private therapist. The payments are bribes disguised as business expenses. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Cassia wasn't just pushing papers, she was funding her schemes through a network of lies, all tucked neatly into my company's accounts. But another name kept surfacing in my mind, Juniper Vale. She had been at my side for years, handling my calendar, organizing every detail. Lately, her eyes had avoided mine more than once. I whispered the thought aloud. Almost against my will, Juniper must have helped them. Bram hesitated. I wouldn't be so sure. Before I could press him, Juniper herself appeared at the end of the hallway, clutching a clipboard to her chest. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face pale, her lips trembling as she caught sight of us. "I'm sorry," she blurted, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to." Cassia said if I didn't do what she asked, my brother's visa would be revoked. He'd be deported within weeks. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. I only gave her access to the scheduling system. "I swear. I never touched the accounts." The words cut through me, not like betrayal, but like a wound shared. Shock mingled with pity. She wasn't a conspirator. She was another pawn, cornered by Cassia's cruelty. Bram placed a hand on my arm, steady but urgent. "It's Cassia. Isolde. Always Cassia. You can't waste your strength on the wrong enemy." I nodded slowly, my chest tightening. the truth settling heavy inside me as I realized the battle ahead was far more dangerous than I had allowed myself to believe. The storm had rolled in fast, rattling the window panes of Leora's room and filling the air with the scent of rain. I sat on the edge of her bed, watching her twist the hem of her blanket between nervous fingers. Her eyes flicked toward the door, as though she feared someone might be listening. Even here, Aunt Isolde, she whispered. Leaning closer, I took something from beneath her pillow. She pulled out a small flash drive, her hand shaking as she placed it in mine. I copied it from Mr. Hale's laptop while he was talking to Aunt Cassia. I blinked, startled by the weight of what she had just confessed. Leora, you could have been caught. I know, she said, her voice barely louder than the rain outside. But you needed to see it. I heard them say they were going to hide the draft there. I slid the flash drive into my laptop, my pulse hammering. A document opened almost immediately, a memorandum of transfer, granting full authority to Cassia in the event of my temporary incapacity. My breath caught at the phrasing. Incapacity was no accident. It was premeditated. Before I could process the words, Leora touched my arm. There's more. I recorded something. Too. She pulled out her tablet, her thumb hesitating before pressing play. The audio crackled, then sharpened into Cassia's unmistakable voice. She signs. Then we manage the rest. The sound hollowed my chest. I stared at my niece, this child who had risked everything to hand me the truth. Her lips trembled, but her eyes were steady, braver than I could have expected from someone so young. I closed the laptop gently and pulled her into my arms, holding her tight against me as the storm outside crashed against the house. Cassia's plan was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was documented, recorded, undeniable. And now that the evidence sat in my hands, there was no turning back. The boardroom smelled faintly of lemon polish, the long mahogany table gleaming under the overhead lights. I walked in with Bram at my side, and Althea Rook just a step behind. The retired judge's quiet authority filled the room without a word. Investors sat scattered along the table, their expressions polite. Curious. Cassia was already seated at the head, Drummond Hale close by with a folder positioned neatly in front of him. Isolde, Cassia greeted, her voice smooth as ever. So glad you could join us. We've all been waiting. Let's make this easy. She reached for the teapot beside her, pouring a stream of golden liquid into a porcelain cup. Chamomile with valerian root. It will calm your nerves. She slid it across the table toward me, her smile as bright as if we were at brunch. I wrapped my fingers around the cup, but did not drink. Instead, I let my gaze drift to the folder. Routine documents, I asked. Drummond cleared his throat. Yes. Standard authority transfer. A safeguard. Really. His eyes stayed down, never once meeting mine. Bram leaned forward. Funny how those safeguards always seem to benefit the same person. Cassia's smile faltered for just a second, then returned, sharper this time. Isolde, please. We all want what's best for you. I set the cup down carefully, my hands steady. Then you won't mind a little transparency. With one gesture, I pointed to the small red light blinking at the corner of the room. The cameras were live, and on the screen at the end of the table, the muted face of an outside counsel flickered to life, patched in through secure video. This meeting is being observed, I said evenly, every word recorded. Cassia's lips pressed thin, the practiced charm slipping as she leaned back in her chair. Her eyes cut sharp toward Drummond, who shifted uneasily, his fingers twitching near the folder. The investors exchanged glances, murmurs rippling through the room. The stage I had built was no longer under Cassia's control, and I could feel the tension coiling tighter as she prepared her next move. I slid the flash drive into the port, and the speakers filled with Cassia's voice. Cold and clear. She signs. Then we manage the rest. The room stilled. Cassia's smile did not return this time. Instead, she leaned forward, her tone sharp. Isolde has had episodes. You've all seen her exhaustion. She's not well. This paranoia only proves it. I reached into my briefcase and laid a sealed envelope on the table. Independent evaluations from my physician. No impairment, no episodes. I met each investor's gaze, letting the silence linger until the papers were passed down the line. Bram stood then, placing a second folder in front of the group. Here are the payment logs. Transfers routed to Mara Quint. Cassia's private therapist, disguised as consulting invoices. Inflated and unauthorized. Juniper, pale and trembling at the end of the table, finally spoke. She forced me. She said if I didn't help, my brother would lose his visa. I only gave her access. I never touched the accounts. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at me. Cassia slammed her palm against the table. Once she signs, she sleeps. The words burst out before she could stop them. Drummond flinched, his face blanching, as if the admission had ripped the floor out from under him. Althea's voice cut through the chaos, steady and commanding. Enough. This board is no longer safe under Cassia's influence. I recommend immediate suspension pending investigation. The Investor Council's voice followed from the screen. Firm and decisive. I second that. The record will show a motion to suspend and audit without delay. As the weight of their words settled over the room, I felt the truth strike me fully. Cassia hadn't planned to sideline me for a week or a month. She meant to silence me forever, to take my signature and erase my voice. The realization left my hands steady at last, ready for whatever came next. The Courtyard Cafe was quiet in the late afternoon. The sound of a fountain trickling between bursts of warm desert wind. I sat at a shaded table, the steam of my coffee curling upward, watching life move again, without the shadow that had hung over me for weeks. Cassia was gone, suspended from every role, her charm stripped to nothing once the board saw her unveiled. Drummond, pale and shaken, now answered questions for investigators instead of asking them for me. Juniper, at last free from the grip of threats, had been placed under protection for her brother's case. And Bram, steady as always, had stepped into the seat at the head of operations, the place Cassia had tried to steal. I had spent the last few days drafting something of my own, not documents of surrender, but the beginning of a fund to protect whistleblowers in small family businesses. No one should ever feel alone when silence is demanded of them. Leora bounded up the stone path, her sneakers slapping against the courtyard tiles, her hair catching the light. She slid into the seat beside me, eyes bright. I touched her hand, steadying the energy that radiated from her. Your voice saved us, I told her softly. She smiled, though her shoulders eased only after hearing it spoken aloud. We sat together, sharing a plate of sweet bread, while the fountain bubbled gently behind us. Relief washed through me, but not passivity. For years, I had thought silence kept the peace. I now knew it could also be a cage. The quiet had saved me once, but it would be my voice that carried me forward. And this time, I would not let anyone take it from me.